Jensen talked about a lot of stuff with Ansel. I'm going to go into the architecture, give you some details, a lot of good juicy stuff about Ansel. How does it work? What's the API look like? What do the calls look like? All that stuff. But so some questions that come up: is Ansel going to only run on 1080? And the answer is no. Ansel's going to run on Pascal and Maxwell. So it's just goodness for the universe. So that's one question. Another question is Ansel, some kind of magical driver thing, or does it integrate in games, or how does it work? We'll get into that, but specifically, Ansel does require integration in the game. It's super simple, so it's not some kind of sneaky driver thing. You integrate it into a game. Game developers will choose to integrate it. It's super simple. We'll actually show you some examples of that. And once it's integrated, you get that full Ansel functionality. I think there was one other question which I've forgotten, so I don't know, Rev or whatever. If you guys want to fire it off and clear up that kind of stuff, that's great. If you have questions as we go, by the way, I'd prefer you ask them. I know that's how we've been doing it, but I certainly prefer that too. So this is more of a conversation. So all right, going forward, NDA embargoed until I guess BDR or Fish tell you it's not.
17th at 6 a.m.
There you go. 17th at 6 a.m. What Pacific?
Pacific time.
Pacific.
Excellent. I'm not even looking at slides, so sorry about that. There you go.
What you just said embargoed?
What I just said is not embargoed, but from everything after this slide is embargoed.
Oh wait, but we can't actually show the slide telling us something.
It's like Fight Club. That's right. The first rule about yeah.
The embargo date is embargoed.
Exactly. Yeah, the question is the embargo date embargoed, and I think it's like telling people you've got a secret. That's not really the intent here. The intent is that the news comes out May 17th at 6 a.m. Pacific. I'm not the embargo police. If you have embargo questions, I would say Brian's your guy. Do you have embargo questions or Ansel questions? Oh yeah. Oh, so the previous demonstration that was running at full that HD, the limit of our LED wall, which is 19 by 10. Oh, sorry. Gosh, somebody even told me that. Someone actually had a conversation with me earlier. Someone talked to me earlier about what I should do. So the question is, what resolution was that running at? And the answer is that's full 1080 HD, everything turned up, cranked up. That's what it was. And that's actually just because that's the limitation of our LED wall here is 19 by 10. And by the way, if you did see tearing on the LED wall, that's because our LED wall is a 60 hertz monitor, so we need fast sync, like now. Okay. So let's get into Ansel stuff. So you saw the slide from Jensen. We're pretty geeked up, frankly, about Ansel, and we're just geeked up about content and games forever. I mean, I'm a gamer. I'm sure you guys have killed me plenty in all sorts of games, but I'm not just a gamer because I enjoy gaming. I enjoy the visuals and the experiences of the universe, and particularly since we've been working with game developers for decades. We have a deep appreciation of the amount of energy and effort it requires into making these worlds. In many cases, it's thousands of man-years can go into the creation of a AAA game. In some cases, it's as much or more energy is going into a AAA game than going into a movie. Because it's harder. Honestly, I'm a little biased, but I actually think it's harder because you have to model the whole world, and you don't get to decide exclusively where the player is going to look or where he's going to move. So you have to kind of model everything. And it's kind of a bummer sometimes when you go through the world and you don't see it all. So we wanted to provide a way to, celebrate the creations, these amazing creations that are video games. Not only are the games themselves amazing, but there's a whole new kind of art form coming out where people are getting quite good at this. There's people whose whole job is literally taking screenshots and videos from games to kind of, sell that amazing imagery. So we wanted to lean into that. The architecture is pretty simple. The basic premise is that we integrate a library into the game. It's a very easy to integrate library. And we have some code in the driver that handles things like hooking up to buffers and shaders and stuff like that. And I'll get that into a fair bit. The integration is pretty simple. We're going to show you some demonstrations. In fact, you saw some earlier. The witness integration was about 40 lines of code. That's it. In many cases, these integrations can be done in less than a day. So it's a super easy to integrate library instead of functionality. And I don't know what's going on back there, but I hope nothing falls on me. One of the great features about it is that we've kind of solved all the painful things for developers. We do a standardized overlay set of UI controls, so the developers don't have to write all that stuff. And that typically can be tedious, time-consuming code to do that. So we've solved that problem for the developer, and we actually standardized it for the users so that they can get used to one familiar set of controls, regardless of which game Ansel's integrated in, so they can kind of leverage and kind of get good at taking pictures. Witcher 3 was a little bit more complex. It was 150 lines of code, but that's nothing. Games are often more than 1 million lines of code, so that's something that we can do in a simple way. A little bit deeper on the architecture, and this may address a couple of other questions that I know have popped up. So there's a lot of functionality in Ansel. The first, of course, that we mentioned was it's got a free camera. So we actually leverage the camera interfaces that are in every game. Remember, we know all that stuff about viewports and multi-res and all that kind of good stuff. We hook the camera of the game. We then can pause time, and we can manipulate that camera in interesting ways. We can do high resolutions and 360s and stereo and all that stuff, and we'll dive into that in a great bit of detail. We also have an overlay UI piece of code, so that basically reads input from the game and then displays the options that are available, because not all games are going to support every feature of Ansel, because there may be some limitations. For example, some games may not want a completely free-moving camera due to maybe cheats. They don't want to have someone doing it for cheats. Or maybe they don't want to support a weird field of view because they think it might give someone an advantage or something like that. So we'll respect the behavior of the game as we read that and display that in the UI. One of the cool things about Ansel that I'm also excited about is that it's going to come with an SDK. So you saw those effects in the UI. Those effects are actually written with an SDK that's going to be open. We're going to provide a bunch of sample effects to the community and let the community then go crazy, and it can just plug right into Ansel. So this is going to allow people to kind of go crazy with creating effects for their cinematography, for their photographs. This is going to be pretty cool. You'll see the list of effects. We're going to give them a good start, but I expect this is just going to go crazy, and we're going to see all sorts of really cool effects and post-processing being done. So yeah, I'm not going to go through all the Ansel interfaces, but some of the basic kinds of things are, you call set configuration, and that's to basically read in the game settings, coordinate systems, so that we can integrate Ansel into a wide variety of games and understand how the game camera system works and things of that nature. And then there's a session active, basically pass the control to Ansel, pause the time in the game, remove the game HUD, because if you're taking a picture, you probably don't want crosshairs and HUDs and life bars and buttons for whatnot. And then, of course, we can pass it back. And then once Ansel has control, you want to update camera. Take the shot, within the bounds of whatever the game limits are. And then, of course, we can pass control, back to the game, resume time, put the HUD back up, all that kind of stuff. So a simple set of interfaces. When we set out, by the way, our goal is actually one line of code. That was our goal. Because I guess 0 would be the speed of light. But we wanted to make it as easy to integrate as possible, so as many games could integrate, so we could all enjoy it as much as we can in all of our favorite games. So, free camera. One of the problems with games today, of course, is that if you take a picture, you're stuck with whatever camera freedom the games give you. And there's a few games that give you a fair amount of camera freedom, but with an Ansel integration, if they support free roaming camera, we can go anywhere. You can go 1,000 miles up in the air, you can pan around in a third-person game and take a picture of the phone of your character, you can do whatever. And you saw some examples of that. This is one of the key pieces that makes in-game cinematography powerful. And in fact, it's one of the things that some of the select few have been able to get special builds of games to do. So some of the game photographing ninjas out there actually work with the developers and publishers of the game to get super special elite builds of games that do special things. One of them is to do things like this, which is a free camera. Now, one of the other really cool features of Ansel, and we'll go into how this works, is super resolution. In fact, you can take enormously high resolution photographs. We can, regardless really of what the game natively supports, we can support integer multiples of resolution in both X and Y, limited really by ultimately hard drive space and hard drive I/O speed more than anything. But so you see this picture here on the left. This is out of Witcher 3. You see the tiny little book there, and the zoom over here, and then you get the the text that you get there, and that's actually from the same photograph, from the same image. We can capture an enormous amount of detail and resolution there. So why don't we take a look at what we can do here? So Haldor,
yes.
Are you here?
I am here. Can you guys hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
So here we have, essentially that same scene in Witcher 3. So Haldor, take it away.
Yeah, so, same scene. I flew out, of course I started here where Geralt is on the balcony, and I just flew out so I could frame the shot that I wanted to take. Of course I could point the camera any way I want to. I'm going to try to move not too fast because it makes everybody sick, I think, on such a big screen.
After we did 200 pips of Doom.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Oh, everybody's warmed up.
They're all warmed up.
Sweet. So this is okay?
Oh, yeah.
All right. It's a pretty nice scene. But yeah, so we're going to take a high resolution picture here just to kind of give you a sense for how high the resolution can be. So as I showed yesterday, you simply move here to high resolution, and then you have the multiplier. Now, I'm not going to set the multiplier really high here because it's going to take some time, but we've already pre-made the shot. We did that earlier today. This is just kind of showing you what the process is like. And if we switch to demo B machine, we can actually see the high resolution picture. And there we have that. And you can see that we took a picture with a multiplier of 24. So it's 46,000 pixels wide and almost 26,000 pixels tall. And to give you a sense of what that means, let's zoom in on the lower level there and just select a little section and see.
How cool is that?
Yeah,
Yeah, we need 4K monitors, whatever. We need a 46K monitor.
Yeah, 46K monitor. And so, but this was actually kind of interesting because we see that we could almost read what's on that paper lying on the floor. So we kind of we went into CSI mode. But the problem here is the camera wasn't oriented correctly so we could read it. So we took another shot with high resolution. And this is actually what we found. So the technology actually can be useful to uncover things in games that you didn't know were there. And now let's switch back to demo A machine. And so, and we can of course take, this, for instance, this setup here is great for a 360. So I'm gonna just generate one of those. How's that? Let's see if we can't find that here on my hard drive. Yes. Here it is. And so we didn't show you guys yesterday what a 360 looks like. We did 360 stereo. So here's a 360 of where I was. And
that's essentially an unwrapped equitriangular projection onto a planar projection, which I'll actually walk through how that works. But that's what an unwrapped sphere essentially looks like.
Yep. That's exactly what that is. And
cool. All right. So let's we can go back to the slides. We got more stuff to show you.
Yep.
So that's the ultra high resolution. So obviously, you want to get super high resolution for a whole number of use cases, right? The first, of course, is if you can render at super high resolution, you could then actually essentially super sample and end up with, at any size, a highly filtered, super sharp edge. Or, of course, you could print at high resolution. So we've got some really nice prints that we took with Ansel over there on the wall that I think you guys have seen. And if you didn't check it out, there's a really cool poster from Witcher 3 on the back side there. It's, I don't know, 38 by 8 feet or something like that, taken from a single grab out of Witcher, which is pretty awesome. There's lots of all sorts of problems for doing this in today's games. Monitor resolution, a lot of times games are limited to whatever the monitor resolution is in terms of screenshot. So, if you wanted to be a game photographer, you pretty much had to get a 4 or 5K display. There's API limitations in terms of just the sheer size of addressable surfaces. So, some APIs don't let you go, say, beyond 16K for a render target. So how in the world are we taking a 46K by 46K picture? Video memory, a 46K by 46K picture, if we took it in one picture, would need something a little bit more than an 8 gigabyte frame buffer. Third-party apps sometimes cause issues. They don't support all the modes. They have difficulties there. And of course, the game client themselves can be limitations in terms of resolutions they also support in the modes, and maybe you can't rotate the camera and all those kinds of things. So, there's lots of workarounds. None of them are awesome. I mean, if you happen to be one of the lucky few, you might be able to get a custom game build, but not everyone gets that. Sometimes they'll patch the features in, but sometimes they don't even go in the main line of the game. It's like a special standalone game. You can try to do this by hand, and people have done that, where they'll position the camera, take a picture, carefully move it over with a landmark, take a picture, carefully move it down. They'll kind of hand stitch a picture. That has some challenges. And then, of course, the last one, which is the fix it in Photoshop or fix it in post. And I guess the big challenge with that is it an honest screenshot at that point? Now you can start photoshopping and blurring and lens flaring and all that kind of stuff, and that's not really what the game did. So one of the challenges with that tiling approach is if you do kind of move the camera around and try to stitch things together, you'll get different lighting values, and you can end up with different tone map results, and you get wiki wonky. That's what it was, right? You get a wiki wonky result. And that's, now you can try to fix that if you want. You can try to take that stitch thing into Photoshop and adjust it, but that's just kind of a pain in the ass, and who wants to do that? So what we do is we actually use a CUDA-based stitcher. We tile the screen. The number of tiles of the screen depends on the resolution that you're trying to take, and they're overlapping tiles. And there's a careful algorithm to the way that it overlaps. And then we collect all those tiles, and then we do the post in one big pass. The nice thing about that is it's actually GPU accelerated. The limit really, in terms of performance, is the game settings and the resolution that can generate those frames, and actually I/O, because we're writing out large files and stuff like that. So to render out a maximum resolution picture, it might be minutes or maybe even many minutes to do that, because it's not the GPU is the problem. You're actually tiling it out, putting it to the hard drive, stitching it together, all that kind of stuff. That image that you saw on the back there from Witcher 3, that was a shot we took out of Witcher 3. That was a 2.5 gigapixel source image. And yeah, it didn't support 2.5 gigapixel rendering. And we actually did that because we had to produce something larger than we were going to print on, because that aspect ratio was 38 by 8. This is what you see on that poster wall, but we took a much larger picture. The file that we actually ended up printing was 450 megapixels. And we're actually, sadly, limited by printer technology, so they need to get on that too, because that printer that does that large format is only 100 DPI, which that kind of sucks. So we need better printers now too. So I'm pretty sure Ansel's going to revitalize the entire large format printer industry. At least I hope so. And that's a pretty big file, right? That was a 1.5 gigabyte file. The current limitation in Ansel is 4.5 gigapixel images. Hopefully that will keep you guys happy for a little while. It probably will keep Seagate happy too. To do that, it would be 3,600 stitched tiles. One of the other kind of cool tricks that we do is we can hook the game's LOD controls. So we saw that, for example, with that Witcher. If you pull the camera back in any game, right, and you're way, way, way back from some piece of object, the game has an LOD system for running in real time, which means things that are far away, it's going to load a lower level of detail. When that little piece of text was on the floor, that was probably like 4 pixels. So it probably loaded like a 2x2 or 4x4 pixel as a texture for that book, right? And if that's what it did, when you zoomed in, you would get noise, which no one wants that. So we can hook the LOD and basically force the game to always run with maximum LOD everywhere when you're in screenshot mode. So things like tessellation and procedural hair, you can essentially zoom in infinitely, and there's always detail and resolution there. So these are some things that we've kind of thought about and integrated into Ansel, so that when you take your photograph, it can be as good as that engine is possible to generate, and it's the assets there allowed. So that's pretty cool. So that's ultra high resolution. One of the other cool things we do is we can grab the raw buffers. We can essentially do a RAW or an EXR grab. So an EXR is an ILM format for FP16 color data. So if this is the original game, and this is how the game tone mapped it, this is using an FP16 component per color format, we can grab that raw buffer, and then you can do the same thing you would do with like a raw image in Photoshop, and you can turn day into night by just tone mapping it yourself. Because you've got that full dynamic range there, you can basically do exposure control. That's pretty cool. So the game did it, the game generated the data, so why can't we do something cool with it? And so we can. We provide access to that raw data, you can suck it into Photoshop and go crazy with exposure control and whatnot. So that's another pretty cool feature. You can do that externally with a raw grab with EXR, or you can actually do that in-game using Ansel's post-processing capabilities. So we showed a little bit of that, and you saw that in the UI. So one of the cool things about integrating with the game is we now have kind of access and knowledge of all their buffers, color buffers and Z buffers and texture buffers and G buffers and normals and all that good stuff. And we can use those for really clever post-processing techniques. So we actually have a post-processing API with a shader API that we're going to provide to you guys so that you can write your own shaders to do your own post-processing effects in any game that Ansel supports. And we expect people will pass them around and do cool things, and there'll be a whole kind of community of shaders and post-processing that's kind of evolved out of Ansel. So we're pretty psyched about stuff like that. This is the list of effects that we're going to ship with kind of out of the gate. There'll be more over time for sure, but this is a pretty good selection of things. You've got things to adjust color, film grains and balloons and blurs. You've got lens flares and color aberrations and tone mapping operators. A good selection of things to kind of touch up your masterpiece in-game in-engine. And these things can access the buffers, the raw buffers of the game to do kind of more sophisticated processing. So light shafts, and if you really want to kind of work on your edges, we've got FXAA. That's our analytic kind of edge detection anti-aliasing. We can run that as a post-process effect too. So a good place to get started for folks to go then unleash their programming creativity for post-processing. Okay, so any questions on what I've talked about so far? No? Yeah? No? Okay, cool. So good, we're good so far. I can't see, there's a big light in my eye.
Hold on.
Okay, cool.
Hold on.
Is the camera now the point of reference for rendering objects? So, in quite a few video games in the past, if you would free roam with a camera and move around a corner, you'd see things you didn't want to see.
Yeah, so the camera is the camera of the game, and we're just moving it around. So that becomes the reference point for the world to load levels of detail, to load geometry, everything else. So if you have a free camera, you could end up going places that the developer didn't intend. So they can actually provide a limit to camera control. So they can provide maybe an offset from the original camera position or character position. They can provide collision detection for the camera, so you can't go places you shouldn't. So they don't necessarily have to literally model the entire world, because maybe they didn't want to model the other continent that you're going to fly over to or something like that. So they can provide those limits. Any others? Cool. All right, so let's roll on to 360s. So you saw this again last night from Jensen, where we took a photo bubble and he showed it on a phone in an HMD. This is kind of an unwrapped version of Witcher, and then the wrapped version in the sphere over there. Let's go ahead and bring up the demo. We'll do another example of a 360, and we'll kind of dive into how that works. Yep. Take it away, Haldor.
All right, so we're in the witness here, and I've flown above this lake just because I can. And it's a nice setting though, and so I want to capture the full environment here. And similarly to what we did before, I just adjust the capture type. And in this case, I just go to 360, so it's not stereo. And then I simply trigger the snap, and that was it. And then I go to my screenshots folder, and in there we will have the result. And that's what that looks like. Now, what you'll notice in this particular capture is that you're maybe not seeing so much of this distortion, and that's just because at the poles, so at the top and the bottom, it just happens to be very little detail in this particular environment. So that's why this looks actually more like a typical panorama, but this is a full 360.
Cool. So let's hop back to the slides, and I'll kind of walk you through how this works. Can we come back to the slides, maybe? Yeah, there we go. Cool. So the way it works. Much like a panoramic shot or a standard shot, the camera has a viewport into the world. It takes a planar photograph, right? It's ultimately a 2D photograph, as we got our computer graphics 101 lesson last night and from Tom today. And then what we do is we take that photograph and we project it into a sphere. And then as we move around, we rotate the camera, each stop taking a planar photograph, projecting it into a sphere. For a typical 360 surround, we're actually taking 10 pictures, so they're overlapping. So we do seamless edge blending. We don't have any registration problems that are kind of typical of, I'll call it, photographic approaches in the real world, because in the real world, you probably don't have perfect alignment of your camera and perfect registration of your turning, where in the computer world, we can control that with a piece of C code. So it's perfectly aligned and perfectly registered every time. So our stitcher can produce a flawless result. And we can step through that. And that's what an equirectangular projection looks like before you wrap it into a sphere. To maybe kind of make this a little bit easier to understand, if we were to do this, say, for a cube, you take 6 photographs, one of each face, right? That's a pretty basic, we've all seen a cube map before. So that's 6 photographs onto each face of the cube. If you were to then do an equirectangular projection, which is to take that and then make it into a sphere, you would warp it into this kind of shape and then wrap it onto a sphere, and as it's wrapped onto a sphere, it kind of, again, it looks more correct. Now, there's no free lunch here. In the end, it's for them too, because in the end, it's celebrating their work. It's letting the community celebrate their work, and the more people see, screenshots out of their games or photo bubbles out of the game, the more people are going to be excited about it and hopefully want to buy and play their game. So, I think in general, the adoption's been fantastic. So, We've got integrations in The Division, Witness, Lawbreakers, Witcher, Paragon, all coming up, all hot games. I think all of these were mentioned last night, but there's a few more that weren't mentioned. UT, Fortnite, Abduction, and No Man's Sky, all coming, all integrations, and there'll be a lot more, I'm sure. We tried to keep this, a little bit under wraps. We want to make sure there's a little surprise for folks. But I think there's a lot of excitement on the developer side of this, both because it's super easy, it solves a real problem, it makes their content available for everyone, and then it actually makes their content available in new ways. If you haven't done it, you should check it out. There's a couple HMDs in the back that have a whole bunch of pre-generated 360 stereo photospheres, and it's pretty awesome. It's great just to put on a HMD, and then you're in a stereo photosphere of a game that never knew about VR. It was 3D, obviously, so it seems like it was an obvious thing, but by integrating Ansel, you can now bring a new experience of that game into VR, and they're surprisingly compelling. There's a shot that's loaded back there that's from The Witness of a statue inside of a room, and it's amazing. Their sense of presence there is really phenomenal. So there'll be lots more games coming, but these are the ones we can talk about right now. The first 9: Division, Witness, Lawbreakers, Witcher, Paragon, Fortnite, Abduction, No Man's Sky, and No Tournament. Okay. So we're going to take a look at one more game that we've got an integration in. This is Tom Clancy's Division, The Division from Ubi. Stunningly beautiful game, doing really well. So why don't we kind of find a good spot and take a picture. Here we go. Picture of Brooklyn Bridge.
Brooklyn Bridge.
Snow.
Yeah.
So grab the picture.
Let's put some effects on.
Oh yeah, make it.
Here's that Instagram effect, like with the logo.
Yeah.
Pretty extreme, but it looks good.
Can you get a little camera roll in there?
Yeah, of course.
Get artsy on it.
Anything for you, Tony.
Oh, excellent.
See?
You the man.
Look at that. Beautiful.
And
snap. Done.
Okay.
So, and of course, we have.
You can hop back to the game.
We have a lot of different settings. Which allows you to tweak the effect to your heart's content. Add a vignette maybe and brighten it up a little bit. There's a lot of options.
This is actually an example of a game that the developer was excited about Ansel, but they provided, I'll call it, some limits.
Yeah.
Some games are going to have a free roaming, unlimited camera, go anywhere, do anything, take a picture of anything, stop time, whatever. Some games aren't. Right? Some games are real-time multiplayer games, and it's a little bit hard for any individual to be able to stop time for the whole universe. That becomes a little bit of a complicated thing to work out. And of course, some games don't want a free roaming camera for potential, fairness reasons or player reasons and stuff like that. So in this is a case where they provide input to our API. We respect those limits. We provide the flexibility to take the shots and the post-processing and super high resolution, all that good stuff, while not having to cross any boundaries into, or you're cheating, or you're giving someone an unfair advantage, or whatever. So that's the great thing. It's a partnership with the game developers. They don't have to sneak anything by. Pretty cool. Thanks, Haldor.
Thank you.
All right, so back to the slides. So we just a bunch of pretty pictures, just because we can. Some of these are stunning. A lot of these are over here. There's some Division shots. Brooklyn Bridge. Witcher, more Witcher. So that's it. I think I'm pretty close to on time. But so again, free camera. Kind of no limits in terms of resolution. Well, there are limits, but they're super high, 4.5 gigapixels in terms of resolution. Post-processing, along with the shader API and SDK. The ability to grab the raw image and do EXR processing in Photoshop or your image editor of choice. And then 360s, both stereo and regular for photo bubbles. So that's Ansel. Pretty psyched about it. Hopefully the community's going to go crazy with it, and we're going to kind of turbocharge this already really exciting kind of game photography space. So there's some hands going up. I'm sorry, I saw this guy's hand first. I'll be right over there in a second, I swear. Yeah? So the question is, where does the name come from? And I'm actually even worried that if I answer that question, I could get in trouble. But there's this guy who's a fairly famous photographer named Ansel Adams. So that's where the name comes from. He's probably one of the legends in photography. So it was actually originally it was a code name, Project Ansel, but we just kind of fell in love with the name so much that we just why not? It seemed apropos. So that's where the name comes from. And if I get in trouble, I hopefully won't. So I'll come right back to you because I promised I'd go over there next.
For the 360.
Yeah.
For the 360 stereo, is there positional tracking as well? Can you lean into objects and things like that?
So the question is for 360 stereo, is there positional tracking? So the head mount API provides all of the XY locations, but again, it's the photo bubble itself is a series of 2D pictures mapped onto a photo bubble. So you can't, for example, walk around a chair. There's no notion of depth or geometry in that photo bubble, at least not in today's instantiation. So you can get closer to it and you're zooming into a picture, but you can't kind of walk around it. Does that make sense? You can lean in, it's essentially a zoom. You're getting closer to the bubble, right? But there's no notion of occlusion or depth or geometry within that bubble. Does that make sense? Okay. Right down here, yeah.
Is the limitation for 360 stereo photos 4.5 gigapixels as well? So is it, are you getting half the resolution essentially, or are you doing two individual 4.5s?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. Haldor, do you happen to, or Rev, do you happen to know the answer of the limitation of the resolution on photo bubbles? The 360s?
Can I have the mic?
You have
Actually, the only reason there's any limitation there is because that slider is kind of
has to stop somewhere.
Get it to go past that 32. So we'll probably allow you to take even higher resolution pictures, and it's really a non-issue. The only limitation is the size of your hard disk and how much time you're willing to wait for it to write out.
If we find that 4.5 gigapixels isn't enough, we'll go higher, and we'll take a cut out of Seagate's profits. It'll be good.
Yeah, it's a quick one. I believe last night I mentioned that there's an app, Android for cardboard. Does that also support iOS?
Do we have an iOS build coming?
Yeah, the plan is to have one. We just didn't have enough time to finish that up, but there will be one coming.
So coming in hot.
It's coming in hot.
Let me come here, and then I'll come back to you since we got one.
Follow the mics.
In real life, you can
follow the mics. I'm following the mics.
In real life, you can swap different lenses on camera. In real life, you can swap different lenses on your camera, and the reason to do it is not only to zoom in, so what you can do with a high resolution, but only to change the depth of field, to open or close the aperture, and to make distortions. You have distortions like fisheye, but there are also distortions that make, for example, more beautiful pictures if you use a portrait-like lens with a long
focal view.
Focal view, right?
Yeah.
So, what about it? What about the depth of field?
Yep.
And such effects in your Ansel?
Yeah. So we can actually support that. We actually can have already, if you saw it, a programmable field of view. And the lenses themselves, you could do an arbitrary post-processing shader to manipulate that itself. And I guess you're probably limited by whatever the in-game camera's camera is.
Yeah, but part of it is actually capturing the depth buffer. So it is exactly as was described in the question. You need, as long as we get the depth buffer, we can absolutely implement those different lenses, and we would like to do that.
We actually do have it, right?
Yeah, well, we have depth buffer capture working for just a few games as it is today, and we need to add to that list before we feel comfortable about announcing that. But as soon as we have the depth buffer capture working across a wide range of titles, then we can absolutely implement different lenses.
Hey, I was wondering if there was any way this could be implemented with shadow play.
So the question is, can we implement it with shadow play? And that's a great idea. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. We good? No more stumpers? Okay, cool. Thanks. Thanks, Haldor. By the way, this is Haldor Banner. He's like one of the main rocket scientists behind Ansel. So if you see him, make sure, and you like Ansel, make sure you give him a high five or a hug, because that seems to be the theme. Thanks, everybody. So let's see, who's up? Is it Rev? Are you up next?